Good afternoon, my dear students. Today's topic, we are going to cover about Upanishad. Well, this Upanishad is a part of the Vedic literature. You understand? As a matter of fact, the Indian culture, the tradition, and philosophy are all stood up on this Upanishad. Upanishad. The term Upanishad literally means sitting down near the Guru, very close to the Guru, and the spiritual teacher, whatever knowledge that he has acquired, would be passed on to his disciple. The mystic doctrines that are closely listened by the student, sitting close to the Guru, is actually called as Upanishad. The word actually has derived from two words, Upa and Nishad. So, Upa means close or sitting close to the Guru. Among the Upanishads, nearly 108 Upanishads were discovered. Among them, 13 are very much important. And which are these 13 Upanishads? They are the Chandogya Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, Ayatreya Upanishad, Kaushtaki Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, Mundaka Upanishad, Tayatreka Upanishad, Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, Shvetashvatara Upanishad, Isha, Prashna, Mandukya, and Maitri Upanishads. So these are the available Upanishads among 108 Upanishads. One of the longest and also the oldest among all the other Upanishads which were composed by the ancient rishis. Next part, that is Vedanga. Veda and Anga, which means the limbs of the Veda. There are technically 6 subjects related to the Vedas. How human being requires the limb, just like that, these are different subjects that assist the Vedas in its formation or in its construction. That is Shiksha or phonetics. Phonetics is nothing but the pronunciation of the letters. Certain words comes from the nasal point, or that is from the nose. Certain words that we need to elaborate or stress it from our throat. Based on that, this education was called as Shiksha. Next one, Kalpa. Kalpa is about rituals. Third one, Vyakarna, grammar. When we make a sentence, grammars are very much essential, or else our communication could be misleading. So in those days itself, the acharyas were much intelligent and had contributed towards Vyakarna. Nirukta is the next part, which means etymology. Nirukta is the rise or the birth of the words. You understand? That is again another important factor related towards Vedanga. Chandas is a meter. Normally this is used in the poetries. You understand? For the poetries, the measurement of the words, maybe certain sentences are lengthier one. So it is all about the stress on a lengthier or on the shorter part. That is Chandas. The last of the subject in the Vedanga are Jyotishya, which means astronomy. Based on the planetary signs and all these things, astronomy was mentioned. Further, that is Upaveda. These are subsidiary Vedas, and these are not a religious part, but these are secular subjects. So touching some of the important aspects like Ayurveda, which deals about medicine. Today we have got medical store, like we have got the allopathy kind of medicines. But those days, medicines were extracted from the herbs and the roots. So Ayurveda was one of the glorious medicinal part that was contributed by the ancient people of Vedic literature or during the Vedic civilization. And of course, even today, most of the things are followed in India as well as in many other foreign nations. So Ayurveda occupies a high place in the history of ancient India. Dhanurveda, which means the art of warfare. When I mention about warfare, it is all about how to fight. It is not just taking a sword or taking a bow and arrow and shooting at the enemy. There are technical aspects. There are different techniques in the art of warfare. When I mention it is an art of warfare, it beautifully says that there are a lot of subjects related to the warfare. So how beautiful this concept called as art of warfare was also created by the Aryans or by the Vedic civilization. Third one, Gandharva Veda. These people were lovers of music. So naturally they gave importance for the studies of music. Today, music is something which we are living in the world with, living in the music. We are surrounded by music. But those days itself, look at the people aesthetic sense. They were very much attracted towards music. So Gandharva Veda dealt about all these subjects called as music. Shilpa Shastra, it's an art of architecture, how to construct. Today we have got engineering skills, engineering colleges. Shilpa Shastra is all about like civil engineering, construct the palace, construct the temples. It all requires deep knowledge of science. It also requires a knowledge about astronomy, mathematics. So that is a beauty where we come across in this part of Upaveda. Moving further is the next one, Darshanas. It is in the form of sutra format, which is very short to understand, and this is quite helpful for the people in different walks of life. So what are the different darshanas? Number one, Nyaya Darshana. Nyaya Darshana means logic or law, and this was composed by the sage Gautama. Second one, Vaisheshika Darshana. Sage Kannada or Kanda had dealt with this. It deals about the Padarthas. Number three, Sankhya Darshana, composed by sage Kapila, and it says about Purusha and Prakriti. Yoga Darshana, composed by the sage Patanjali, speaks about yoga. Fifth one, Purva Mimamsa or Purva Mimamsa Darshana. It was composed by the sage Jaimini, and this is all about rituals. You understand? This is all about rituals. Next one, Uttara Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa Darshana was composed by Badrayana. It's more of philosophical part, which deals about Brahman, the world, and individual. This is all about the Darshana. Apart from all these Vedic literature, next one we come across is the epic period. The two great epics were composed in India by the different sages, and one among the most important epic of India is Ramayana, written by the sage Valmiki. The central characters of this one are, as some of you might be knowing it, Lord Rama, which is an incarnation of Lord Mahavishnu, his wife Sita Devi, that is a female central character, Lakshmana, Bharata, Kshatrugna are the three brothers of Lord Rama, and of course there is Hanuman, who played a very important role in this Ramayana. That is a picture that you are seeing here. So one of the glorious epic which is composed by Valmiki, and one of the most important question from your exam perspective. This contains about 24,000 words or the lines. Ramayana consists about 24,000 lines. So like that way, Ramayana is composed. Another important epic in India is Mahabharata. This was authored by sage Vedavyasa, And this has beyond 1 lakh shloka or hymns. Particularly, there are again many number of sub-work related to Mahabharata, such as Bhagavad Gita, and naturally this goes on for about 2 lakhs individual verse lines. Perhaps Mahabharata is one of the longest poem ever written. The last part of the literature is the Purana. Among the Purana, Indian literature has got a wide range of topics. Certain things are related with legends, traditions. Among them, 18 are very much important. Among the 18 Purana, Brahma Purana, Vishnu Purana, Garuda Purana, Skanda Purana, Matsya Purana are very much important for us. Matsya Purana, Vishnu Purana is related with history. There are a lot of historical examples and relationships are mentioned here. Among the other sutra, Srauta Sutra are Vedic sacrifices that were again composed by the sages. Griha Sutra, that is also one of the glorious sutras which gave an insight, knowledge about the duties of a family man. Griha means house. So naturally, Sutra means formula or procedures, how to lead a family. So like that way, these duties of a family man and responsibilities of a family man, how to carry out, was all given in the Griha Sutra. Last one, Dharma Sutra, and that dealt about the social laws and duties. How an individual lives in a society following the rules, regulations of the society. That is what these sutras means. I hope I'm clear with you with the Vedic literatures. Next part, let's talk about the political conditions. Before I start with the political conditions, I have to make it clear, Vedic civilization was divided into 2 parts. One is early Vedic period and the other one is later Vedic period. Early Vedic period, how did the political conditions existed? Or how was the political conditions of early Vedic period? Aryans, when they came to India in different numbers of tribes, they settled in the river Ganges region, isn't it? As you all know that it was called as Aryavarta. After settling down there was no kingdom as such. They were rather called as many organized tribes. You understand? They were called only as a tribes. But gradually, these tribes started having a head or a leader who was known as Rajan. His major duty was to protect, to protect the cattle, to protect his people and also his territories. That was his major role in the society or in the group. Rajan, his position was only, he was elected or selected by the people. To assist him in administration, he had Purohita, Sangrahitri, Senapati, Vishayapati and Gramini. So these were the members who assisted the king in his cabinet. It was a limited government or limited cabinet that the ruler had in the early Vedic period. Later Vedic period, you can see tremendous changes. But during the Vedic civilization of early part, this was very complex kind of a political condition that prevailed. Now, when there is a Rajan, definitely we need to come across with how did the families came, how did the villages came into existence, and what was the families and different other formats of the society were called as. Families were called as Kula. They settled in grama or villages. And each kula or the family had a head. And he was called as Kulapati. Families had a head and he was called as Kulapati. As they settled in the gramas, many such families put together, it came to be called as grama or village. Am I reaching you? Many families, family number 1, 2, 3, 4, it might extend even up to 50 or 100. So different families settled in a villages. So when they settled in a village, they required a leader. And that head was called as Gramini. I hope I'm reaching you. Family had a head called as Kulapati. Many families put together came to be called as Grama. And a Grama had a Gramini. Almost all these Gramas put together, they formed into another association that was called as Vishaya. And all these Vishayas had a head called as Vishayapati. You understand? Families, grama they settled. Many gramas had a head called Gramini. And many gramas formed itself into a Vishaya. And each Vishayas had a head called as Vishayapati. And this further, many such gramas formed itself into an association as Jana. This formed into a Jana. And the head of the Jana was none other but the Rajan. Rajan became the head of the Janas. He was a supreme among all these group of people. I hope I'm reaching you. So this is how the political situation existed in the times of early Vedic period. Few changes that you can see in a later part. This is only just a hierarchical order that I have maintained. Janas and Vishaya, Grama, Kula on the one side and the other things on the rest of the things. Now, what are the duties of the king? What did the king do in the administration? King was also called as protector or Gopa. He also enjoyed a title as supreme ruler or Samrat. You understand? Major duty is to protect. Next one, he governed the people with their consent and approval. He took the people's consent and approval to administer. The major duty of the king was to protect the tribe, because more often there used to be quarrel and conflict among different groups of Aryans or different groups of the tribes. So to keep them at safe, to keep them and protect them from any harm from the enemies, he had to defend his kingdom. And of course, he was again supported by some more other officers and other organizational bodies as such as Sabha and Samiti. These were two popular assemblies in the administration. Sabha was a member of group of elders, Samiti comprising the group of experts. So in this way, he had run the administration. For all the services, the people in return, out of love, they used to give him lots of gifts. At occasions, the ruler accepted it. It was not by force, it was out of love as a token of appreciation of his service. Not only that, had I mentioned earlier that he enjoyed titles such as Ekrat and Samrat. But during the later Vedic period, the position of the king started to change. So far, there was no concept of kingdom, there was only Jana. But during the later Vedic period, Jana became the most powerful and they converted or they got transformation into kingdom. And all these kingdoms became provinces. Provinces were further divided into three parts. That was Gopa, Vishaya and Grama. Jana became more powerful and that got converted into, or that got turned into a kingdoms, and each kingdoms got a transformation as provinces, and all the provinces were called as, that was subdivided into Gopa, Vishaya and Grama. So as you can see here, image of the king or the Raja. You understand? This is an image of a king, how he appeared. Most of the serials or any other TV shows that you would have seen it. So usually the king, you can see how royal he was, how well built and all the qualities that he possessed. And on the other side you can see here how the king usually used to carry on his administration. During the later Vedic period, the position of the king was high. The king usually enjoyed a high status in the society, and of course, we could definitely say that he became more and more powerful. Kingship during early Vedic period was just elected basis, but now during the later Vedic period, it became hereditary. That was not based on the merit, it was based on the heredity factors. So that is to say about the political conditions of the kings during early and later Vedic period. Further, to add up more officers to the administration, the king as usually was assisted by a Purohita. Purohita was a chief advisor to the king. In terms of war and other activities, a Senani became the army chief. I hope I am reaching you. Purohita, Senani was the army chief. Spasa, which means a spy. This was an addition in times of later Vedic period. Duta was a messenger. You understand? Duta was a messenger which came up in the later Vedic period. And likewise, Sutha was another position enjoyed during later Vedic period, which means Sutha is nothing but a charioteer. Now the titles of the king or the Rajan was much more superior and supreme as in the times of later Vedic period. He was called as Rajan, Maharajan, Rajadiraja, Ekrat, Virat, Samrat and Chakravarti, the king among the kings. So like this way, he enjoyed many titles. So you can imagine now his power, position had enhanced it to the greater heights. So that is a term that we can understand in this part. During the later Vedic period, some of the kingdoms that came across, different kingdoms were emerging, and those kingdoms that were known as Kashi, Yadu, Druyu, Puru, Panchala, Videya, Turvasu, Anu, Kuru and Bharata. If you want, you can note it down. These were some of the different dynasties that emerged in the later Vedic period. Now, what are the duties of the king? What did the king do in the administration? King was also called as protector or Gopa. He also enjoyed a title as supreme ruler or Samrat. You understand? Major duty is to protect. Next one, he governed the people with their consent and approval. He took the people's consent and approval to administer. The major duty of the king was to protect the tribe, because more often there used to be quarrel and conflict among different groups of Aryans or different groups of the tribes. So to keep them at safe, to keep them and protect them from any harm from the enemies, he had to defend his kingdom. And of course, he was again supported by some more other officers and other organizational bodies as such as Sabha and Samiti. These were two popular assemblies in the administration. Sabha was a member of group of elders. Another sacrifice that took his position to higher level was Ashwamedha Sacrifice. So during the ancient period in India, many rulers performed this Ashwamedha sacrifices. This was to enhance their imperialism and sovereignty. So usually the rulers used to select a royal horse from the stable, and a epigraphy or a epithet was or a label was imbibed on the face of a horse, and this horse was being bodyguarded by many number of charioteers and an army. This royal horse usually carried on the label sent by the king, and this horse was allowed to graze on any of the field on its free will. It can roam around anywhere as on its wish. Say for example, if this horse usually went across to the neighboring villages or the town which is ruled by some other ruler, and if that ruler ties away this horse, that meant he was not willing to give away his kingdom, but rather he was ready to fight with this king. So in that way, war usually took place, and this supreme ruler would have probably defeated that king, and that kingdom would be added to this ruler. So likewise, many such dynasties came under or came into the control of the ruler who had sent the horse. So this horse completes its journey and later returns to its capital, and finally that was slaughtered and distributed to the people. That is how usually this Ashwamedha sacrifice were held. The next one is all about Vajrapaya Sacrifice. Vajrapaya Sacrifice was once again performed to establish political supremacy. A Brahmana usually conducted the sacrifice for the progeny of the king. You understand? So like that way, this sacrifice was held in the time of Vedic period. And if you look into another aspect, it was well organized. It consists of cavalry, which means horse soldiers. There were infantry, foot soldiers, and elephant force. Navy was not known in the time of Vedic civilization. Warfare became very much complicated in the later Vedic period. If you look into this part, you can say that bows and arrow, sword, and many other metallic weapons were used in the Vedic period in both the times. Usually in the later Vedic period, you can say that bows and arrow, sword, spear, mace, axes, helmet, armors were all used for the defensive purpose as well as for the for striking at the enemy. So winning became one of the major important factor. It could be through neat way or it could be in a unethical way. So war became a matter of pride among the Aryans. So that was political condition. Next one, social condition or the social life. Joint family system usually were seen in the time of early as well as later Vedic period. Aryan society was patriarchal. Kulapati was usually a father. Eldest son or eldest member was usually called as the head of the family. If you see at one point, monogamy was practiced. Monogamy was practiced in the time of both the sessions or both the times. Polygamy was only confined to the royal family members. And if you look at the one more aspect, widow remarriage had existed in the time of early Vedic period. Status of women was high. If suppose a woman loses her husband, she had a liberty that she can marry the younger brother of her dead husband. So that kind of a liberty was given to the women. And definitely there were some of the women who were educated. And if you look at the one more liberal aspects here, father's property was usually inherited by the son. But during the time of during the early Vedic period, even the daughter also had the rights on that property. So this was a kind of a liberal kind of a scenario that existed in the times of early Vedic period. Well, properties such as cattle, horses, gold, ornaments, that reflected the status of a person in the society. Land and a house which enhanced his position further. During the early as well as the later Vedic period, women also received education. But in the time of early Vedic period, some of the women who received education, they were, from your exam point of view, it is quite important. Some of the women scholars were Yami, Saraswati, Gargi, Maitreyi, Lopamudra, Madalasa, Urvashi, Anushuya, Kaushtaki, Paulami, Indrani, Vishwavara, Ghosha, Sulabha, Apala, Angalarsi. These are some of the women scholars. But my suggestion for you is, if you can remember at least 4 to 5 names. I'll repeat that. Number 1, Gargi, Gargi, Maitreyi, Maitreyi, Lopamudra, 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 Vishwavara, Vishvavara, Vishwavara, Ghosha, Gosha, Ghosha, and Apala. These names are sufficient from your exam point of view. In fact, they used to compose many number of hymns. The women during the ancient Vedic times came to be called as Rishikas. Rishi, Rishika. Rishi for the male, Rishika for the female. This is another important thing that you need to understand. The society was based on color, and it is called as Chaturvarna system. This prevailed during early as well as later Vedic period. In the early Vedic period, this was quite liberal part, but in this Chaturvarna system, Brahmana occupied the high position. Next came Kshatriya. The second position, he was a warrior. Third one was a Vaishyas, who was a trader. Fourth one was a Shudra, who was a menial worker. It should come in a proper order. Brahmana, who was regarded as a learned man. Kshatriya, who was called as a warrior clan. Vaishyas, which meant the traders or a businessman. And final one is Shudra. Brahmana was a learned professor, Kshatriya was a warrior, Vaishya was a merchant, and Shudra was a worker for all these people. During the early Vedic period, caste was quite liberal. There was no casteism. There was no evil practices of casteism. Upper caste person can marry a woman from a lower caste, or a woman from a lower caste can marry a man from a upper caste. Education was given for all the group. Interdining was there. Inter-caste marriage also had prevailed. But in the later Vedic period, all these things had changed. It all changed in the later Vedic period. There is a belief saying that Brahma got the birth from the head of Brahmins, got birth from the head of the Brahma. Kshatriya was from the shoulders of Brahma. Vaishya from the thighs of the Brahma. Shudra got its birth from the feet. This is just a belief in the Rigvedic part. Nothing to hurt anyone here. It's just a belief of hierarchy. But whatever it is, next one, moving across with another concept that is called as Varnashrama Dharma. This is something called as the Vedic Systems goal of each individual life. So here when we come across life of a human being during Vedic civilization was classified, or the life expectancy was classified into 100 years. The life expectation was 100 years. And that 100 years were divided into 4 parts. So that means 25 years into 4. Man, or when a child is born, the first stage what he undergoes as a student, where he acquires education, and that stage is called as Brahmacharya Ashrama, where he entitles with the education, knowledge, and he has to remain as a student till the age of 25, acquiring all the education from the time of his birth, with all the Upanishad ceremony and acquiring the knowledge from the teacher. All these things comes under the Brahmacharya Ashrama. Second one is a Grihastha Ashrama. After acquiring the knowledge, a man establishes himself into organizing himself into a job. Entering into, after acquiring the job, making his career, he can get into a business of householder, that is getting married and becoming a married person. And in this stage, he gains, after marriage, he begets a child, and he has to perform the responsibility as a father to his child. As a child grows older, he has to impart knowledge, education, and to see that he becomes a responsible citizen and get him married to a different girl. So that all the duties of a man was seen in the Grihastha Ashrama. Third one, after performing the responsibility to the family and being a responsible citizen in the society, the third stage is usually called as Vanaprastha Ashrama. Performing the family duties and the duties to the society. In the third stage, it is an age or a stage where he is retiring from all the duties and responsibilities of family, preparing himself for the path of salvation. So for that sake, he might go to the forest for meditation. The last stage was usually the sannyas ashrama, where all the commitments, responsibilities he has to renunciate and go on a pilgrimage in seeking knowledge or salvation without having any bondages with the family, wife, or any commitments or luxury. That is a sannyas ashrama. So this is actually the comparison between the early Vedic period as well as later Vedic period. Later Vedic period underwent tremendous changes. The position of the Shudras became one of the vulnerable case as compared with early Vedic stages. The women's position was also restricted, and the society became more and more urban during the time of later Vedic period. At the same time, kingship, absolute monarchism also became one of the criteria that could be seen in the later Vedic period. I hope I am reaching you so far. Vedic literature created an important impact on the people during later Vedic stages. Next one, very important factor, marriage. See, among the Vedic civilization, there were the practice of marriage was nearly 8 types. I'm just going to give you the names of that. Number 1, Brahma Vivaha, Prajapatiya Vivaha, Daiva Vivaha, Harsha Vivaha, Asura Vivaha, Gandharva Vivaha, Rakshasa Vivaha, and Paishacha Vivaha. These were 8 varieties of marriage which prevailed in Vedic civilization. Next one, amusement. See, the Aryans were great lovers of music and they had their own amusement. One could be vocal and the other one could be instrumental. So this was a kind of an amusement what they used to have during their free time. They had a knowledge of few important Vedic instruments such as drum, veena, then they had harp, cymbals, shank and varieties of other instruments. This was about instruments that they used to have. Chariot racing and gambling were another source of amusement for these Aryans. Jewelries attracted both men and women. Both used to have jewelries. Of course, the love for the ornaments were more among the women class. As you can see in these pictures, women usually had a headgear, necklaces, hands, arms, and many finger rings. All these kind of ornaments were found by the women. As you can see in this one, gambling was a favorite amusement and the other one was chariot racing. So these two created a pastime of these Vedic people. Next one, the dress of the people. And this one was three varieties. One is adivasa, an overgarment. Vasa was actually a garment. A nivi was an inner garment. So this is how usually the dress were classified. Uttareya was a shawl that was draped around by the men as well as the women. Head turban was another headgear or another dress that men and women usually adorned themselves. Next one is about the food culture. That was very simple. Food culture was very simple. Wheat, rice, barley, vegetable, fruit, milk and milk products were the diet of these people. Consumption of fish and meat was also found in Rig Veda. There was an intoxicating drink. There was an intoxicating drinks that were called as Soma and Sura. 2 mark question from your exam perspective. Soma and Sura were an alcoholic drink which existed in the Vedic civilization. Next one, the economic life. Definitely the Rigvedic times witnessed agriculture as a major occupation. Ox were usually used to plow the field in the land, and during this Vedic civilization, iron came into existence. Iron became one of the major metal that was used by the people. In a large scale, it was used in the later Vedic period. So trade also was carried on in the times of these early Vedic period as well as later Vedic period. Some of the important cities and some of the important animals that were domesticated by them were horses, cow and dogs. And rest of the things mentioned. Trade was actually carried on. Commerce also existed. Barter system of trade flourished in the time of early Vedic period. Barter system had existed in the early Vedic period, and gradually there was a transition. There was a changes in the trade and commerce in the later Vedic period. The trade and commerce existed, but this barter system was replaced with a golden coin. A gold coin came into existence during later Vedic period, which was called as Nishka. 1 mark question. Nishka became one of the important means of trade and commerce during later Vedic period. As you can see, some of the agricultural cultivation that was seen, barley, wheat, rice, cotton, oilseed, etc. were produced. Some of the important trading centers of those era were Gandhar, Kurukshetra, Panchal, Koshala, Indraprastha, Dwaraka, Vidarbha, Kashi, Anga. These were the important trading centers of Vedic times. I hope I am reaching you so far. Any confusion in the early Vedic period? Rituals were very simple, yagas were performed, and that is how usually these religious fervors were seen. Apart from that, Surya, Prithvi, Soma were also there. Polytheism were known to them. There was no idol worship. Indra became the god of, or he was the head of all the gods. Agni was a god of fire. Varuna was a god of rain. Vayu was a god of wind. Prithvi is a god of earth. Surya, sun god. Then we have Soma, the god of intoxication or drink. So this is how usually the Vedic religion existed. This was called as a Sanatana Dharma because we don't find anybody as a founder of this religion. So naturally Hinduism was based on Sanatana Dharma. Practices were very simple. Yagas were very simple in its structure during the early Vedic period. But later Vedic period went drastic changes. Rituals, ceremonies became more and more popular. Apart from that, different other gods came into existence, such as the different other gods were such as Yama, Shani, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva or Maheshwara, Shakti goddess, God Indra, Ganesha, Subramanya, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kali, Durga, etc. Like these way, different gods came into existence. In both the times, cow was regarded as an important deity among these religions. It was considered as very sacred. Slaughtering of cows were prohibited. In the early Vedic period, the slaughtering of cow had existed, but during later Vedic period, cow was never slaughtered. Worshipping of idols also started growing in the time of later Vedic period. Evil worship, black magic, witchcraft also came into existence in the later Vedic period. That was a very sorrowful thing that I have to mention here. But all these factors had moved on in later Vedic period in much complexive way. Well, coming to an end of our sessions, Varna system prevailed here. Ashramas were given importance. Purusha have a discussion when we meet in the offline classes. I hope you are clear with all these questions. Please do refer the notes and try to gather up the notes now itself. You understand? Thank you so much. We will meet in the next class for further topic. Thank you. Take care of yourselves. This chapter. So further any doubts if you have,